Hi, I'm the daughter they didn't expect to come home. While I was overseas, my father slipped into a coma, 5 months. And while he lay in silence, my sister handed his house over to her mother-in-law like he was already gone. No call, no question. Just a quiet theft wrapped in a smile. And when I came back, they laughed. They told me to find him another place, like he was a stray dog, not the man who raised us. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just picked up my bag, called a BMW, and left. 2 hours later, they came home. And what they found waiting for them? That's where everything changed. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from right now? Morning coffee, late night walk? Drop it in the comments. And hold tight. This story doesn't end the way they thought it would. I pulled into the driveway a little after 1. The house looked exactly the same as when I left. Same porch swing with that slight tilt. Same crack in the driveway I used to skip over as a kid. You'd never guess anything had happened here. But something had, and I felt it before I even cut the engine. I sat there a moment longer, engine humming, watching a squirrel dart across the lawn like it was the only living thing with a purpose. My suitcase was in the trunk, untouched since the flight. The jet lag hadn't hit yet. What hit was the quiet. Not a single car passed, no neighbor waved. Just silence. A thick, indifferent kind of silence. I reached for the handle, got out, and stood still for a second, letting the cold settle through my coat. I hadn't been home in almost 6 months. Dad slipped into a coma just before Thanksgiving. I'd gotten on a plane from Zurich 2 days later, but then everything got messy. The updates from back home were vague, scattered, filtered through texts from my sister. He's stable. Still no change. Nothing new. Eventually, I stopped asking. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and something faintly burnt, maybe toast. There were voices somewhere deeper in the house, low and casual, like it was any other Tuesday. I didn't call out. I just stood in the hallway for a few seconds, waiting, listening. No one came. The living room had a new rug. The walls had been painted, soft beige, less yellow than before. A few framed photos had been replaced with generic art. Nothing big, just enough to make me feel like I'd walked into someone else's version of the house I grew up in. I followed the voices into the kitchen. My sister, Trish, stood at the counter slicing oranges. Her husband, Mark, sat at the table scrolling his phone, nodding absently to whatever she was saying. Across from him, my Aunt Bev was holding a mug with both hands like she always did. They looked up when I walked in. Trish smiled. Not a warm smile, just polite. "Oh," she said, pausing mid-slice. "You made it." That was it. No. Hug? No. How was the flight? No. I'm so glad you're here. Just, you made it. I texted, I said, more to fill the space than to accuse. "We figured you'd come straight here," she replied, going back to her oranges. Mark gave me a nod. Bev smiled faintly and looked back down into her mug. No one asked how Dad was when I last saw him. No one mentioned the hospital. No one seemed particularly surprised or relieved that I had come all this way. I sat down at the table across from Mark. The chair felt lower than I remembered, or maybe I just felt smaller. "So, who's been staying here?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. Mark looked up. "Mostly us. And, Gina." I blinked. "Gina?" "Yeah, her mom's been here too. It just made more sense with the kids and all." Gina was Trish's mother-in-law, the woman who once told Dad he looked like a mechanic pretending to be a gentleman. She'd never liked this house, said the ceilings were too low. I looked over at Trish, who was placing the sliced oranges in a glass bowl like it was a task of national importance. "So, they're staying here? Like, living here?" Trish didn't look up. "Well, yeah. I mean, Dad's not using it, and it just seemed practical. We figured If he ever wakes up, we'll figure it out then. If. It's been 5 months, Sarah. Bev cleared her throat like she wanted to soften things, but didn't quite know how. I nodded slowly. And you didn't think maybe I should have been in that conversation? Trish shrugged. We handled it. It made sense at the time. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? Mark stood, stretched. Anyway, I gotta run. The boys have soccer. Bev followed him out with a nice seeing you again, as if we'd bumped into each other at the grocery store. That left me and Trish. She picked up the orange bowl and headed for the fridge. Want some tea or something? I shook my head. She opened the fridge door and paused. Look, don't make this into a thing. We're all just doing the best we can, okay? There was no anger in her voice, just dismissal. Like this wasn't a big deal, like I was overreacting for even noticing. Then she laughed. Not loud, not mean. Just a little puff of breath as she pulled a container of hummus from the shelf. It's not like he's gonna care, she said. He probably doesn't even know what year it is. I stared at her. That laugh stuck in the air like smoke. That's when I realized this wasn't just about logistics. This was their new normal. They'd already rewritten the story. I was a footnote. Dad was a fading obligation. And the house? The house was just a resource. I turned away and stepped back into the hallway. My eyes drifted toward the small side table near the front door. Sitting there, half buried under a stack of coupons and junk mail, was Dad's old keychain, the one shaped like a baseball. Glove. I'd given it to him when I was 10. He'd carried it for 20 years. It used to dangle from his belt loop. Now it looked forgotten, tossed there by someone who didn't know, or didn't care, what it meant. I picked it up. The leather was cracked, the ring bent slightly out of shape. I stood there holding it while, in the kitchen, Trish turned on the faucet and started humming something tuneless. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked one question that made the room go quiet. I stayed where I was, near the hallway, the keychain still warm in my palm. I didn't walk back into the kitchen right away. I needed a second to make sure my voice would come out steady. When I did step in, Trish was drying her hands on a dish towel. She looked up, already braced for something, though I hadn't said a word yet. "Can I ask you something?" I said. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't loud. It was the same tone I'd used 100 times in this house growing up, asking where the batteries were or whether Dad had already eaten. Mark had paused near the doorway, keys in his hand. Bev hadn't left after all. She was still there, standing by the counter, pretending to read something on her phone. "What?" Trish said. I rested my hand on the back of the chair, grounding myself. "When did you decide Dad wasn't coming back here?" No one answered, not immediately. They exchanged looks first, not confusion, not surprise. It was the look people share when they're checking whether they're about to say something out loud that they've already agreed on in private. Mark cleared his throat. "Sarah, I'm just asking," I said. "I want to understand." Trish let out a breath through her nose, the kind that usually came before she explained something she thought was obvious. "We didn't decide it like that." "Okay," I said. "Then how?" She folded the towel once, then again, very carefully. "We thought he was dead." The words landed softly. No emphasis, no drama. She said it the same way someone might say they thought the store closed at 6. For a moment, my mind refused to take them in. It felt like my brain had hit a slick patch and just slid. "Dead," I repeated, quietly. Mark nodded, as if this helped. "I mean, not officially, but 5 months, no response, machines doing everything. Doctors weren't exactly optimistic." "That's not what they told me," I said. "Well," Trish replied, shrugging slightly, "you weren't here." There it was. Not an apology. Not even a pause to check how that sounded. Just a statement. a fact in her mind. Bev laughed then, a small laugh, almost embarrassed. "Oh, honey, you know how these things go. Sometimes you have to make calls before life makes them for you." Mark smiled like this was supposed to ease the tension. "Yeah, it's not like anyone did this to hurt you." The laugh spread, thin and uncomfortable, but it spread. Not everyone joined in, but no one shut it down either. I stood there, feeling something settle over me. Not heat, not panic. Something colder, heavier. They weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because they'd already decided this was reasonable. The laughter was there to smooth the edges, to make it sound smaller than it was. I looked at Trish's face, at Mark's relaxed posture, at Bev still holding her phone like it could rescue her from being part of this. No one met my eyes for long. That's when I noticed who hadn't said a word at all, who hadn't defended me, who hadn't even shifted uncomfortably. Silence can be loud when you know what it means. I suddenly understood that whatever loyalty had once existed in this room no longer included me. Maybe it never had. Maybe I'd just been slow to see it. My shoulders tightened. I rolled them back slightly, like I was adjusting a coat that didn't quite fit anymore. I thought of Dad, lying somewhere under fluorescent lights, completely unaware that his life had been quietly rearranged while he slept, unaware that people were speaking of him in past tense. I didn't interrupt them. I didn't argue. I didn't ask how they could live with that sentence. Instead, I focused on the sensation in my hands, the faint tremor in my fingers, the way my jaw ached from holding steady. I told myself this wasn't the moment, not yet, because whatever they'd convinced themselves of, they hadn't reached the part where they told me what they expected me to do next. The room lingered in a strange suspension. No one moved. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, distant and ordinary, like the world hadn't noticed what was happening inside this house. Trish finally broke the silence. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, adopting the tone she used when she was about to explain a household rule to her kids. "So," she said, "here's what we were thinking." I stayed standing. Sitting felt like agreeing to something. "Dad can't stay here anymore," she continued. "Not like this. It's not practical." Mark nodded, stepping back into the room fully now. "Yeah, the setup isn't right. Too many stairs, and honestly, it doesn't make sense for Gina to move out again." No one asked what made sense to my father. I watched Trish's mouth as she spoke, noticing how careful she was being with her words. Everything was framed as reasonable, efficient, as if they were discussing cable plans or replacing a furnace. "We figured," she said, "you'd probably want to take care of finding something more appropriate for him." I tilted my head slightly. "Finding something?" "A facility," Mark said quickly. "Or maybe assisted living, or somewhere closer to you if that works better." Bev chimed in from the corner, soft and well-meaning. "There are nice places, Sarah. Clean, good staff, people our age do it all the time." I felt a flicker of disbelief tighten in my chest. "You're talking about him like he's already gone." "No," Trish said. "We're being realistic." There it was again. Realistic. That word had become their shield. She took a step toward me, lowering her voice like that made it kinder. "Look, you're the one who's not tied down here. You don't have kids. You've always been more flexible." Flexible. That was what my absence had turned into. "And the house," Mark added, as if remembering an item on a checklist. "Well, it's settled now, so it's really just about logistics at this point." I waited. I knew something was coming. I could feel it gathering, like a sentence they'd rehearsed but hadn't yet delivered out loud. Trish exhaled and said it. "Find him somewhere else." She didn't rush it. She didn't soften it. She said it plainly, like it was the most natural conclusion in the world. "Find him somewhere else." I repeated it silently, letting each word register. Not find him care, not find him help. Somewhere else, as if my father were a piece of furniture in the wrong room. Mark nodded again. Bev looked down at her hands. No one argued, no one flinched. Something inside me shifted then, not loudly, not violently. It was more like a hinge finally giving way after years of pressure. I realized with an unexpected clarity that my silence had never protected anyone. It hadn't preserved peace. It had only made room for decisions like this to happen without me. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a conclusion they'd reached together, long before I walked through the door. The room felt settled, like the verdict had already been delivered. I was just there to receive it. I looked around at their faces, at the familiar walls that no longer seemed to recognize me. My role had been reassigned without discussion. Daughter had become problem solver. Witness had become executor. I thought of Dad again, of the way he used to sit at this same table, sorting mail with his reading glasses pushed too far down his nose, of how he'd insisted over and over that this house would always be home. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. I focused instead on details, the grain of the wood floor, the faint smudge on the light switch, the sound of my own breathing. I understood then that reacting would give them something they didn't deserve. They expected resistance or tears, maybe even a scene. I gave them none of it. I took a step back, mentally filing away every word, every nod, every silence. There would be time for responses later. This wasn't that moment. For now, I chose stillness. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I stood up. My hands moved first, slow, steady, smoothing the hem of my sweater as if brushing off dust no one else could see. The chair creaked faintly as I stepped back from it, a soft reminder that something had just shifted, even if they hadn't registered it yet. I let my silence settle in the room like fog. Nobody spoke. No one asked where I was going. They all assumed they understood what it meant. Trish's eyes darted up, briefly, then dropped back to her phone. Mark turned toward the hallway, probably thinking about whether to turn the game back on. Bev, sweet Bev, started fiddling with a coaster, aligning it with the grain of the coffee table like the evening needed symmetry. They thought I'd accepted it, that I was leaving quietly, emotionally worn out, defeated, maybe even grateful for their practicality. That's what made it easier for them. Silence, to them, was submission. And I'd given them plenty of that in the past. But this time, the silence wasn't surrender, it was a decision. Mark cleared his throat and said something about lasagna leftovers. Trish mentioned a dentist appointment for Emma next week. The shift was instant, like the whole conversation about Dad had been a temporary inconvenience they were relieved to move past. They had moved on. And they thought I had too. I crossed the living room slowly, every footstep more deliberate than the last, past the family photos that hadn't changed in years, frames still crooked in the same spots, dust gathering in corners that used to be my Saturday chore. I brushed my fingers along the edge of the fireplace mantel, not for sentiment, but to remind myself that I once belonged in this space. The scent of lemon cleaner still lingered faintly. Gina must have wiped down the counters earlier, getting the place ready for my arrival, for the performance. I paused in the hallway near the coat rack. No one followed, no one asked if I needed anything. The click of Bev's teacup meeting its saucer echoed faintly behind me. I slid my coat on slowly, pulling it tight at the collar, not because it was cold, but because it anchored me to the moment. My bag hung where I'd left it earlier, by the door, like I'd always known I wouldn't be staying long. I opened the door. The air outside was sharp, but clear. The sun had lowered behind the neighbor's roofline, casting long shadows across the front lawn. I stepped out and let the door close behind me, Not slamming, not soft, just final. I reached for my phone and opened the rideshare app. I scrolled briefly, then selected the BMW option, not for luxury, but because I wanted the quiet. The tinted windows, the smooth drive, a space between this house and whatever came next. The driver's ETA said 5 minutes. That was fine. I needed the time. I stood at the edge of the porch, hands in my pockets. A breeze lifted the edge of my coat. Across the street, a neighbor watered his lawn in socks. The normalcy of it all was almost obscene. They hadn't come to the door. They wouldn't. They'd misread everything, the silence, the departure, the lack of fight. They didn't know the silence was the fight. I glanced at my phone again, 3 minutes now. I thought of Dad, of what he'd say if he were here. Maybe something small like, "You don't have to explain yourself to people who already made up their minds." He was good at that, making pain feel like clarity. I turned toward the road. A black car rounded the corner, smooth and silent, like it had heard everything that hadn't been said. As it slowed in front of the house, I didn't look back. I didn't wave, I didn't pause for effect. I stepped into the car, shut the door, and gave no destination. Just waited in the stillness, in the absence. They thought the problem had walked out the door. The BMW pulled away from the curb without a sound. Inside it was quiet enough to hear the soft breath of the AC. The windows framed the world like a movie I wasn't part of. Stores rolled by. A mother and son waited at a crosswalk. A teenager held a cardboard sign under the overpass. And still, inside me, nothing moved. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. Not in that moment. There was just stillness, like a lake before a storm you can't quite see but know is coming. My fingers rested lightly on my bag. My phone face down beside me. My shoulders relaxed. It was strange how calm it felt to leave. I didn't ask the driver to take me anywhere specific. I gave him an intersection I knew had a coffee shop with booths that faced the window. I needed to see the outside world moving while mine sat in a strange, deliberate pause. They probably thought I was halfway to the airport by now, or back at the hotel. Wherever they imagined me, it wasn't here, moving through the city, not in a rush, not looking over my shoulder. Back at the house, I pictured Trish unbuttoning her cardigan, sitting back like the crisis had passed. Mark might have poured himself a drink. Ice from the freezer drawer, clinking into one of the old etched glasses Mom used to hate. Bev would be talking to herself in the kitchen, opening cabinets, poking around for a snack she didn't need but always found. Someone probably said, "Well, that could have gone worse." I imagined the way the laughter sounded, muted, relieved. The kind of laughter people use when they're sure they've just avoided trouble. They thought they'd tied it off, handled, done. I let them believe that. I ordered a chamomile tea at the cafe, even though I didn't want it. It gave me something to hold while I watched the street. People passed, busy with their own things. Nobody knew what I'd walked away from. That anonymity felt like armor. The hospital was 12 miles away. I wondered if my father had stirred today, if anyone had even asked, if his nurse had called out his name during a routine check, hoping for something, anything. Had they sent flowers? I doubted it. The idea of him lying in that bed, still alive, still waiting. It caught in my throat for a second, just for a second. There was no one to tell how heavy that felt. No one in that family who would have listened if I had. They had moved on. They'd buried him without a funeral. "Find him somewhere else," they said, as if he were a broken appliance left on the curb. I looked out the window again. A man in a faded baseball cap held the door for a woman pushing a stroller. She smiled. He tipped his head. The small things still happened, even when the big ones cracked underfoot. I opened my phone, not to scroll, not to text. I opened one file, a document I'd saved weeks ago, something I hadn't shown them. I reread the top line. The detail I needed was still there, still solid, still in my favor. I didn't smile, but I felt something shift. They hadn't checked. They never checked. They assumed. That would be their mistake. I tapped the screen off and slid the phone into my coat. People think time stretches out when you're grieving. It doesn't. It snaps tight around you. 2 hours can pass like a breath or crawl like molasses, depending on what you're waiting for. I wasn't waiting for them to call. They wouldn't. I was waiting for something else entirely. Something they wouldn't see coming. I didn't have to rush. That was the beauty of it. They thought the clock had stopped the minute I walked out. They believed the room was reset. The topic closed, the threat gone. But the countdown had already begun. And they were wasting every minute of it. The drive back was quiet. I didn't need noise, didn't need to rehearse anything. The facts were settled. What needed to be said or not said was already clear. The BMW rolled to a soft stop just past the driveway, a little further than where I'd been parked earlier. I stepped out slowly, the weight of the keys in my coat pocket grounding me. The house looked smaller now, or maybe I was seeing it with different eyes. The porch light had come on, though it was still late afternoon. Someone had probably set it to a timer long ago and forgotten about it. The door was slightly ajar, not wide open, just enough to make it look like I was expected, or forgotten. I pushed it open with one hand. They were still there, all of them, the same room, the same light, but the air felt different, thicker. Mark glanced up first. He was mid-sentence, something about switching out the water filter. He didn't finish it. Trish lowered her phone, blinking like she couldn't quite place what was happening. Bev sat curled in the armchair with her legs tucked under her, a half-eaten cookie on a napkin in her lap. I didn't say anything. I just stepped in, let the door click shut behind me, and looked around like I was noticing things for the first time. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was hollow, as if everyone had forgotten what noise was supposed to fill it. I stood for a beat longer than comfort would allow, then moved past them and into the same living room where they'd said those words, where they'd laughed, where they'd decided my father didn't matter anymore. No one asked me why I was back. They didn't dare. The folder in my bag stayed closed. I wasn't here to show anything, not yet. But it was there, tucked between receipts and an old grocery list, one sheet of paper with 2 signatures they hadn't counted on. Earlier, at that cafe, I'd pulled it up on my phone to check one small line in the scanned copy. A date. That was it. Just a date. But it was enough. It meant they'd never actually had the authority to make the decision they'd so casually made. It meant that no matter what they told themselves, no matter what they told each other, they jumped too soon. They hadn't checked. They hadn't thought I would. But I had. That knowledge didn't make me smile. It didn't lift my chest or fill me with triumph. It just kept me steady. "Everything all right?" Bev finally asked, voice soft, like she was afraid to speak too loud. I looked at her, not unkindly, but clearly. I just needed to grab something I forgot. No one moved, no one stopped me. They wanted it to be true, that I had simply forgotten a scarf or a charger, that this wasn't a reset, that I wasn't here to do what I was absolutely going to do. But it was too quiet for that kind of denial to last. I walked into the kitchen, not to search for anything, but to let them hear my steps. The sound of me moving through the house they thought I'd exited for good. I opened a cabinet, closed it again, ran water into a glass, didn't drink it. Every action was small, but deliberate. From the corner of my eye, I could see them shifting. Mark leaned forward slightly, like he wanted to say something. Trish sat straighter, like posture would anchor her. Bev stayed very still. "I thought you were heading back to the city," Mark finally offered. I looked at him. I was. Plans changed. That was all I gave them. That was all they got. The thing they didn't understand, still, was that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means you're watching. Sometimes it means you're choosing the exact second to strike. Their mistake had been assuming I'd go quiet the same way I'd always done. Trish cleared her throat. We didn't mean for it to sound harsh earlier. You know how stress can make people say things? I nodded, not in agreement, just acknowledgement. I know exactly how stress works. No one laughed. It was Mark who cracked first. Look, I know you've always felt like you had to take charge of things, but this is different. We all have lives, real ones. We can't. You think I don't? I said, still calm, still even. Have a real life? He looked away. I'm just saying it's not realistic for you to drop everything. And this isn't just about what you want. That was true. It wasn't. It was about what my father wanted, what he signed, what was legally documented before he ever ended up in that hospital bed, what none of them thought to review. I could have said it right then, could have pulled out the paper, held it up, and made them look. But I didn't, because timing mattered more than truth. I needed them to sit with uncertainty. I wanted them to feel it, that cold twist in the gut when you realize you may have spoken too soon, moved too fast, made the wrong call with the wrong witness in the room. I let them sit in that living room while I walked back toward the front door. Bev half rose, then sat back like she couldn't decide if she should ask something or stay out of it. Nobody stopped me. Nobody followed. They just watched. And that told me everything. They weren't sure what I knew, but they knew I knew something, and that for now was enough. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, then looked back once. I'll be in touch. 3 words, simple, flat, no warmth. But it made Trish's mouth tighten and made Mark glance at Bev like she might translate it better. I stepped out, shut the door behind me, and took a long breath on the porch. They thought they could still fix this quietly. That belief didn't last long. The first sign came as a change in tone, not words. A tightness in voices, shorter sentences. The kind of politeness people use when they've already decided you're a problem that needs managing. I felt it before I heard it, the way you feel pressure drop before a storm. My phone buzzed while I was still sitting in the car a few blocks away from the house. Not a call, a message, then another. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, just checking in. Everything okay with your dad? An old family friend. I heard things got tense. Hope you're taking care of yourself. No details, no questions that mattered. Just enough distance to tell me something was already moving without me. Back inside the house, I could picture it clearly. Trish pacing near the kitchen island, phone pressed to her ear. Mark leaning against the counter, arms crossed, nodding while someone else talked. Bev sitting very still, lips pressed together, pretending she wasn't part of it. They had shifted from defense to offense. By the time I walked back in, shoes still on, coat unzipped, the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations stopped too fast. Phones disappeared into pockets. Faces arranged themselves into something neutral that fooled no one. "What's going on?" I asked, not sharp, just steady. Mark gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing, just trying to clean things up." Clean things up. Like I was a spill. It didn't take long to find out what story they were telling. I didn't need to hear it directly. I heard it in fragments, in the way people phrased things when they thought they were being kind. She's been under a lot of stress. She lives out of town. She doesn't really understand how things work here. She's always been emotional. She's making this harder than it needs to be. And the worst one, the one that landed hardest, she's trying to take control of something that isn't really hers anymore. That one stung. Not because it wasn't new, but because it worked. It painted me as greedy without ever saying the word, as unstable without calling me crazy, as a disruption, not a daughter. They weren't attacking the facts. They were attacking my credibility. That fear sat low in my chest, heavy and familiar. The old one. The fear that if enough people believed the story, the truth wouldn't matter anymore. That silence would look like guilt. That speaking up would make me look exactly like what they said I was. It was a perfect trap. If I defended myself publicly, I'd look desperate, emotional, like I had something to hide. If I stayed quiet, the version of me they were selling would harden into fact. I stood there, listening, breathing evenly, letting that lose-lose reality settle. This was the point where most people break, where they rush in with explanations, documents, raised voices, where they try to correct the narrative while it's still forming and end up feeding it instead. I didn't. I said nothing. That choice didn't calm them the way they expected. It did the opposite. The silence grew teeth. It stretched, it waited, and people who rely on control hate waiting more than confrontation. Trish kept glancing at me, like she expected me to interrupt. Mark over-explained things I hadn't asked about. Bev tried to smooth it over with small talk that landed flat. The longer I stayed quiet, the louder the tension became. They started recalculating in real time. I could see it in their posture, the way confidence drained into caution. They didn't know what I was holding back, only that I wasn't empty-handed. That scared them. Inside, I made the decision alone. No dramatic moment, no sudden clarity. Just a steady understanding settling into place. I wasn't going to save my reputation today. I wasn't going to correct every lie. I wasn't going to beg to be seen fairly. I was going to end this. Not loudly, not emotionally, completely. Whatever happened next would cost something. I accepted that. There was no version of this where everyone walked away clean. But there was a version where the truth stood on its own, undeniable, long after the noise faded. I looked at them, really looked this time, and realized they thought they had boxed me in. That they'd made the space so small I'd have no choice but to fold. They believed they had cornered me. The living room was quiet in the way only a guilty room can be. Words dried up, smiles forced, eye contact avoided. Dishes clinked faintly from the kitchen, where someone was pretending things were normal. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old tension. Then the doorbell rang. No one moved right away. The sound cut through everything, sharp and final. Trish flinched, then gave Mark a glance, like she wanted him to deal with it. He didn't budge. I stood up. I wasn't expecting anyone, not then. And yet, I'd been expecting something. Something that didn't answer to this house's rules, to the unspoken code of sweeping things under the rug and calling it family. When I opened the door, it was Marie. Marie, my father's case manager from the hospital. She looked tired, sharp-eyed, and purposeful, holding a plain white envelope in one hand and her badge in the other. "Sorry for the unannounced visit," she said quietly, eyes skimming the room behind me. "But I thought it was better to bring this in person." She stepped in without waiting. Everything stopped. The air went still. Trish's lips parted slightly, but nothing came out. Mark stood stiff, like a man who just realized he might have left the gas on. Bev put her drink down so carefully, you'd think it was glass on glass. Marie handed me the envelope. No ceremony, just facts. "I know you've been asking for clarity," she said, voice low, direct. "The review board completed the audit. There were discrepancies." I nodded, slowly. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. I stepped back toward the center of the room and placed the envelope on the table. I didn't open it. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't need to. The silence that followed did more than words ever could. The truth didn't come in loud. It didn't pound fists or raise voices. It settled into the room like cold air, creeping into corners, undeniable. Mark sat down. Trish crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. She looked at the envelope like it might bite. Bev reached for her phone, then thought better of it. They were trying to recalculate. Not what they'd done, no one was at that stage yet, but what they could still get away with. What might be salvaged, what could be spun. I didn't interrupt them. I watched it happen. Quietly. Someone started to say something about misunderstanding procedures. Someone else muttered about hospital staff being overworked. There was a lot of, maybe we didn't have all the facts. But the facts were now sitting on the table in plain white paper. That envelope was more than just proof. It was a mirror. And no one liked what they saw in it. I stood by the mantel, not moving, as they stumbled through whatever version of the story they were rewriting for themselves. The same people who painted me as unstable now looked lost, like children caught in a lie that had gone too far. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. The keychain. My father's old, silver keychain, the one with the faded initials. I'd forgotten it was still there, tucked on the bookshelf, where he used to leave it whenever he visited this house. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered, cold, real. No one noticed. It wasn't about the keychain. It never was. It was about everything it represented. The quiet trust, the shared history, the belief that truth didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't hold it up. I didn't make a speech. I just slipped it into my coat pocket. The sound of the heater kicking on was the only thing that filled the silence. Finally, someone asked, "So, what happens now?" I turned, met their eyes, and said the only thing that mattered. Whatever happens next, it won't be hidden. That was it. No threats, no dramatic exits, just clarity. I didn't gloat. I didn't offer forgiveness. They hadn't asked for it, and I wasn't here to hand it out like a prize. Some truths don't come with celebration, they come with cost. And the moment that truth walked in, it asked each of us to pay something. I walked to the door. Marie gave me a brief nod, her expression unreadable. The sun had dropped low outside, casting long, bruised shadows across the porch. Inside, no one followed. When the house finally went quiet, I realized winning wasn't the same as healing. I didn't stay long after that. Nobody asked me to. They lingered in the corners, Trish picking at her nails, Mark suddenly interested in an old photograph on the wall, Bev holding her glass with two hands like it might give her something to say. No one followed me to the door. There were no hugs, no real apologies. Trish muttered something like, "Well, at least it's over now." But it wasn't a sentence meant for me. It was a sentence meant to end things for her. I didn't answer. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. Not cold, just clean. I took a deep breath before getting in the car. My hands were steady on the wheel. I didn't drive straight to the hospital. I stopped at the gas station down the street, picked up a bottle of water and some breath mints. I stood there, staring at the rows of gum and batteries, unsure why I needed a minute, but I did. Sometimes you just need something small and ordinary to remind you you're still part of the world. By the time I reached the hospital, visiting hours were nearly over. The halls were dim, nurses moving slower, softer. Dad was asleep when I walked in, same as he'd been that morning. Nothing miraculous had happened. No sudden signs, no alert eyes opening to ask me how things went. Just the slow rise and fall of his chest, the gentle beep of the monitor, and the sound of the rain starting outside the window. I sat, didn't say anything for a while. I just watched him. His hands, thinner now, rested on top of the blanket. I reached for one, held it lightly. He didn't squeeze back, but I didn't expect him to. I didn't cry. I didn't tell him everything that had happened. He wouldn't have wanted that. What mattered had already been done. What needed to be said had already found its shape in actions, not words. I placed the keychain on the table beside his bed, the same one he used to carry around like a habit. The same one I found in that house. Forgotten, then found, and now home again. I didn't explain it to anyone, didn't even write a note. Just left it there, knowing it belonged in that quiet room more than it ever did in that loud house. And I sat with him for another 20 minutes, until a nurse peeked in gently and reminded me it was time. Days passed. Some paperwork was filed. Some calls were made. The story spread in its own way, less dramatic than anyone expected. No lawsuits, no headlines. Just a shift. Some reputations quietly faded, some relationships quietly frayed. I didn't go back to the house. No one asked me to. The will would be revisited, lawyers would do what they do. I didn't chase the rest of it. It was never about the furniture or the deed or the inheritance. It was about something older, quieter. A few friends called to ask how it all ended. I gave them the version that fit into a few sentences. People like closure, neatness, but real endings aren't tidy. They just settle. And in the settling, something softened. I kept the clothes I'd worn that day in a small bag, tucked away in the back of my closet. Not as a trophy, just as a reminder. I looked at them once, weeks later, and realized they still carried the smell of lemon cleaner from the house. That same house I once thought meant everything. It didn't. It had walls and doors and beds and old photos, yes. But the real inheritance was knowing when to stop holding your breath, when to let go of stories that only ever made room for other people, when to tell yourself, enough. That was what I took with me when I left. Not a check, not a key, just the right to define my own version of peace. The house was never really the inheritance. Knowing when to walk away was.